Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here at the Canton House. I'm with Chris, the Professor Renaldo. Chris Renaldo is many things to many people. He's an expert in bar operations, a superior bartender, spirit guide, or cocktail evangelist. Renaldo is a great listener. I've seen him size up a person in a moment. He's also, fortunately, a great storyteller, an anecdotal raconteur extraordinaire. Chris Renaldo is a writer, humorist, music aficionado, and impresario of good food. Chris Renaldo, thank you so much for meeting and eating with me.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So I put all these labels on you. Is there a label that you most subscribe to?
Uh, actually, probably just bartender or barman.
Barman.
Uh,
Is there a qualification? Is there something that a bartender, a good bartender, must be or do?
I I think maybe some of the things you mentioned. You have to be a good listener. When I teach or I train bartenders or students, I always say that it's. I never know which the right brain and the left brain are, but it requires both. You have to have the technical, the measurements, the recipes, the routine, everything from prepping a bar to opening a bar or what have you. But you also have to have innovation and creativity. That can get a little bit reinventing the wheel-ish, especially in what they call now the craft cocktail culture. When I interview a potential bartender, I don't like the word craft or the term craft cocktail. Every cocktail you make should be a craft cocktail. There's nothing special, but there is I tend to focus on classic cocktails that have been around for hundreds of years: Manhattans, martinis, some of the neo-classics, margaritas and whatnot. And then what I'll do is I'll flip the script. I'll take the gin out and put rum in, or take the rum out and put bourbon in. And that's what I think good bartenders do, have done through history. I mean, I'm a big fan of Trader Vic, who may or may not have created the Mai Tai. And that's what he said. If you learn the basic 10, if you learn your sours, you learn your fizzes, everything evolves out of those. And it's just a matter of changing ingredients or possibly measurements.
Now, I know you're someone who you listen to the person and what they want, but would you say that there is a king of cocktails, the greatest cocktail?
Um, you really can't because when a guest walks in and they don't know what they want, I'll say, what do you like? Do you like tequila? Do you like gin? And what I have as being kind of a voracious reader and literally a student of history, my degree is in history. Cocktails, like anything else, goes through almost like they're cyclical almost, right? Vodka was big in the 70s and 80s. Bourbon made a comeback. Prohibition, gin was popular because you could make it, and you didn't have to age it. So the bathtub gin. So I'll ask them, but people ask for a martini, and most Americans think that's vodka, where the true martini was gin, and it was. Some people will order a Bombay Sapphire martini, and they'll say this tastes like vermouth. I said, well, yeah, it's not a martini without vermouth.
Right.
And actually, the original martini was 2 ounces, 2 ounces. It was a 1-to-1 ratio. Most now is like 8-to-1. They'll put 4 ounces of gin and 1 ounce of vermouth, or a half ounce of vermouth, excuse me. So, but that's. As I said, there one particular. I personally, I'm a big fan of agave spirits. So I love tequila. I used to be known in Atlanta as the Bourbon Cowboy when I wrote my drinking column for the Atlanta Press and Creative Loafing. But there's a very little known but gaining in popularity spirit that comes out of the desert, the high desert in the southwest and northern Mexico, called Sotal. That is for me almost like a blank slate, because it's something that even though they've been drinking it for 800 years, it's relatively new to the mixology scene. So.
Like many great Americans, from Frank Sinatra to Connie Francis, Jack Nicholson to Bill Brown, you're from New Jersey.
Yes, I am. Wayne, New Jersey.
Wayne, New Jersey. So tell us, what would a typical day have been like when you were growing up in New Jersey?
Well, I was I was one of 7 children. My mom stayed at home and raised a family. My dad was a teacher, and then...
Sorry.
No problem. All right.
Ay, pasok mo. It's not your song. Wrong one.
Oh. Getting the full experience. Folks.
You getting this?
Yes.
7 children, 5 boys. So Dad was
Wow.
a teacher and a coach, and then later an administrator. It was, ride your bikes, go play football with your friends. We had the biggest yard, so a lot of the baseball, wiffle ball, football was played depending on what season it was. And with 4 brothers, there was always plenty of guys. You get 4 more neighbors, and you have a team. Away games, you had to be home 5:30 or 6 or whatever it was for dinner. And I think one of the coolest things about my experience was that it was rare that my dad wasn't home for dinner. As I got into high school, and then I was an athlete, practice would run late, and then I'd eat my dinner cold afterwards. But it was idyllic.
Idyllic. How did you learn the art and science of bartending?
Well, it's interesting. I moved to Atlanta in 1988, in December of 1988, and in March of '89, a good friend of mine came down to visit for a weekend, and I hadn't really done a lot. I was kind of getting established in my career as a recruiter, and I said, there's this area called Buckhead. I was living over near Emory in the Toco Hills area, and I said, there's this area called Buckhead. It's kind of like Georgetown, where we went to school. I went to school in Maryland, and so we drove my '67 Galaxy to Paces Ferry Road. You could park on the road back then, and we saw there was a line of bars on Peachtree right at the intersection, and there was a bar called the Acme Bar and Grill, and it was owned by 2 guys from New Jersey, from Berkeley Heights, New Jersey, and so their sign said, "A Buckhead tradition." This was in March. "A Buckhead tradition since February." They had just opened. And I walked in, and they had Bruce Springsteen on the jukebox. They had a New Jersey state flag on the wall and a Garden State Parkway sign. And I said, I'm home. And I hung out there. That kind of became my watering hole. And I guess occasionally the doorman wouldn't show up, and so the owner would say, hey, go check IDs, and we'll cover your tab for the night until the guy gets here. And so one night he called me, and he was a kind of an owner-operator, so he would work 1 or 2 shifts on the bar, and he called me on a Saturday night, and he said, I need you down at the bar at 4 o'clock. I said, what, do you have like a special event? You need a doorman at 4 o'clock? He said, no, I'm going to put you on the bar. I said, what, it's like a bar back? He goes, no, I want you to be a bartender. And I said, I've never made a drink in my life. He said, don't worry about it. He says, you're tall, and you can see people. You ask them what they want. If the name of the spirit is not in the drink, you don't have to make it. Gin and tonic, rum and coke, Jack and Ginger. This wasn't a place where you went for a Manhattan. It was plastic cups and whatnot. But I liked it, And even though I was well established in my recruiting, I would work a couple of shifts, a couple of nights a week. And I did that for the better part of the 90s. And in 99, I became a dad and had to take some time off. But I would do kind of special events, fundraisers at my daughter's school and whatnot. But when I moved out to Santa Fe, I kind of cycled out of recruiting and became a full-time bartender, and I had the privilege of working for two very different but very, I guess, the closest thing that I would consider mentors. One was I worked at the Mineshaft Tavern in Madrid, and Lori Lindsay, who was the owner, just she had a great approach, the whole hospitality. But you know, coming from Atlanta, I really didn't know how to make a margarita. You know, you put fake sour mix, margarita mix, and some tequila, and you know, all about shaking, when to shake, when to stir. And then after the mine shaft, I worked. I worked just as a barback for 4 weeks for a guy named Chris Milligan, who actually was from Georgia, had moved out to Santa Fe in the '90s, and he was the Santa Fe barman, and he was to watch him run a shift as both a manager and as working the service bar and chatting up guests and making drinks. He was the one that really. I always say that you know, I don't lack self-confidence and I don't trade in false modesty. I'm pretty good, but he was like the polish on the diamond that just I said, I can do that. I can do that. I mean, my next job, I got at the most iconic bar in Santa Fe, El Farol, and that's when I kind of blew up as a bartender. So it was, you know, a lot of it was self-taught. As I said, I'm a voracious reader. I'm a collector of Hawaiian shirts. So when I was in thrift stores, if I saw a book on the history of rum or a book on how to make a Manhattan or the spirits and whatever, I've got some great old, you know, I've got a first edition of Trader Vic's Book of Food and Drink, which was published in 1946. Wow. So I, and as the 21st century with YouTube and the internet, there's a lot more information than when I started in the early 90s. Making gin and tonics, rum and cokes in plastic cups. So,
well, Chris, I'm going to give you one of two options, and as the guest, you can choose whichever you prefer. It's totally in your court. Would you like to pause and eat?
Of course. You don't even have to give me option number 2.
We will be right back, folks. We're back after our first round. What do you think so far?
Excellent.
Good. What is something that you would say you have learned about people from being a bartender?
It's really that they're different. That they're different because I'm trying to say I was going to say there's assholes and angels on every street corner, but people come in and never met them before. You do a good show for them, and they appreciate what you do, and it's just you make really a lifelong friend, a lifelong guest. And then there's other people that no matter, and they may be repeat guests too. No matter what you do, they're chronic complainers. They're always they want some sort of ridiculous modification, and especially during the whole COVID situation and coming out with all the stress that we all felt during that, it was almost as if when people started coming out again, they were like double entitled, you know. Oh. And so you you know, you take my first. I was a busboy at a diner in New Jersey when I was a junior in high school, and old Joy, who was my boss, she said, "You take the bitter with the better." You know, just take the bitter with the better.
I like that.
And that's and that's what I've really come to learn about people. I mean, I've worked obviously in Atlanta in the South. I've worked in the Southwest in Santa Fe. I grew up in New Jersey, as I said, working in diners, and spent a lot of nights drinking in really nice posh hotel bars in Manhattan, and also some of the great dives that were down on the Lower East Side and in Hell's Kitchen. So yeah, people are, you know, they're like snowflakes. Everyone, you know, every one of them is different. They're all the same, all part of the same group, but radically different. You know. Yeah.
Going to your writing.
Yeah.
Why do you write?
That's interesting. When I was a freshman in college, I took a creative writing course, and the instructor professor said that I had good chops as a writer, and I didn't really think anything of it. I didn't see myself as a writer. And then I majored in history. And my senior year, I had to do a paper, kind of the graduate equivalent of a thesis, where I did a Lyndon Johnson and the escalation of the Vietnam War, which is not very exciting subject matter. And my professor, Professor Merrill, he goes, "You have a flair for writing. You should look into that." And several years later, I was in a relationship with a woman who said to me, "You need to read more and you need to write more." And so that was when I was in Atlanta, and that's when I started to keep a journal, and the journal turned into this, and maybe there would be something. I think my first published piece was in the Old Poets, Artists, and Madmen in 1996 in Atlanta, and it was about Bruce Springsteen, and he was going through the whole Ghost of Tom Joad phase, where the whole Steinbeck and Grapes of Wrath. And I remember saying it took a multi-millionaire to teach me what it means to be middle class. Singing about the poor to teach me what it's about middle class. And I love Bruce Springsteen. He's a phenomenal writer. And so and as a music aficionado, I just love. We were talking about Reckless Kelly. I mean, I just love people who can write, who can paint pictures with words. Paint pictures with words. Tom Waits is one of my all-time favorite artists. I saw him at the Tabernacle in 2007, and I wept watching him perform. It was just beautiful. So that's and again, that's one of the my daughter, where I worked in Santa Fe, Canyon Road was known for art galleries, and my daughter, who's a brilliant artist herself, said, you're kind of an artist. I said, yeah, I don't work in oils or pastels or clay. I work in tequila and gin and scotch, But again, that's what I was saying earlier about the innovation and the creative aspect of it, that you have this, and what excites me about Sotal is you have this blank canvas. I mean, they're doing things with Sotal, and not when I say they're doing things, I'm not talking about, lime flavored vodka or apple crown. They are aging it, but not like a reposado or an aged tequila. It's almost like a whiskey. Because by definition, whiskey is just distilled grain that's aged in a barrel. Well, the Sotal plant is not a grain. Any more than the agave plant is a grain, or that sugarcane is a grain, where we get rum or tequila or mezcal. But so it's and then you take, so this is this spirit that has nothing to do with whiskey, but you're saying, but it's like a whiskey, so I'm going to approach it with, I'm going to do a Manhattan, or I'm going to do an old fashioned, or I'm going to do a lion's tail, and again, I think maybe my talents, if I have any as a writer, is if you remember the article that I sent to you, is every cocktail has a story. So when I used to teach class, I required my students for their final that they had to create a cocktail, but it had to have a backstory. And I said, sometimes a story, you could be drinking toilet water, but with that story, it's like, wow, this is awesome. And actually, the student who got an A, she had there's a Grateful Dead song, and Scarlet Begonia. Oh yeah. And her parents met at a Dead show, and I just said, just make sure that begonias are, because some plants can be toxic.
Right.
But it was more the color and of the song. But so anyway, so that's it's National Mezcal, it's National Negroni Week, and so the Negroni is a great cocktail because it, unlike a Manhattan or an old fashioned, it's not very spirit forward. It's a 1-1-1. A martini, as I said, is 3-1, 4-1, and you'll have a spirit and then you'll have a mixer. But this is 3 equal parts, so it's 1-1-1. So no one's really driving it. It's more complementary. And again, I don't like to sound pretentious or hoity-toity, a mixologist, but it really has depth and complexity. And that's when I'm creating a drink, or even just making a drink that, like a Manhattan, I want to make sure that I capture that. But as I said with Sotal, it's a completely new experience because it's only been legal for about 30 years. It was illegal to distill it until the late 20th century, and so now it's one of those 500-year-old overnight success stories. So,
Well, this question, staying on the topic of your writing,
yeah.
is kind of a memorial to Norm McDonald. This is
Oh,
a question associated with him.
yeah.
Where do you get your ideas?
Through life, through life. Some, you know, uh, he's only been gone 48 hours, and I already miss him.
Hmm.
Uh,
Me too.
yeah. But the good thing is whether it's Charlie Watts or Norm Macdonald or Tom Petty, they're kind of with us forever,
Right.
through their work. But as I said early on, I used to carry a notepad, or I'd come home from a night at Blind Willie's, and I'd have bev naps and coasters with ideas written on them. I'd have to ask the server, "Hey, let me borrow your pen." So now, or I used to. Now I'm just so busy with the bar business, I don't really have time to write that stuff down. Although in the early days of COVID, I did keep a journal that I haven't looked at since then. But just observing and then kind of filtering it through my own experience, or processing it through my own experience. Every once in a while, and as I said, that's how it started with my Bruce Springsteen article. It was just something that I was listening to Tom Joad, and I was kind of there was a couple of newspaper articles or Rolling Stone articles, and so I tried to look at it growing up in New Jersey.
We're good.
Okay.
All
What did you
set.
say?
I think we're done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So just kind of processing it through.
Shall we take
Another break? Yep.
We'll be back. We're eaters.
Yes.
Not. I hate that word. I hope you're not offended if I say I hate the word foodie.
Oh no. To me, that's like craft cocktail.
It's like you're an eater.
Or you know what? When oh God, I had this young lady, and I was going to hire her as a bartender, and she's boozy.
Mm.
I go as far as booze forward. Like they're all boozy because they have booze in them.
Right.
In fact, I'm on this rock throwing contest or competition on Facebook because the big thing now is alcohol-free spirits. I said, you realize that the vaporized, that's the spirit. That's without alcohol, it's not a spirit.
Right.
It's a soft drink, and it might be very good, might be tasty, but it's not a spirit. You can't. That's an oxymoron. That's like alcohol-free gin.
Right.
It's juniper juice, and but yeah, when people say it's boozy, well, that's because there's booze in it.
Right.
I'm a foodie. Oh, you like food? Wow. Why didn't I think of that?
You're blowing my mind.
Yeah.
We'll be back. We're back yet again. Do you perhaps have a favorite story from your time in the profession of bartending?
There are many, but actually one of my favorites happened just about a month and a half ago. There was the music festival, the arts festival in Brookhaven, and Rick Springfield from the 80s played, and Collective Soul on Friday night. So I was just about getting ready to close. It was around midnight. And this big guy walks in, and he's dressed in black from head to toe, and he's got a lanyard with his backstage credentials on it. He says to me, "Are you guys open?" And I said, "What does that sign say?" Neon sign open. He says, "Well, what time you close?" I said, "When I throw you out of here." He goes, "I'll be back." And he came back with, it wasn't Rick Springfield and Ed Rollins, but the rest of the band.
Right.
And what was funny is Rick Springfield's in his 70s now, and his band were just kind of local hired guns, most of them. And so they were all in like their 20s and 30s, covered in tattoos and piercings and whatnot. But when they and they were just a great group. Thank you.
Thank you.
$6.99. Okay.
Okay, great.
They were all kind of sitting at the bar, and I said, before we get started, it's not uncommon for people to refer to someone in my profession as a rock star. That guy's a rock star bartender. I said, you guys can't do what I do. All due respect. I said, my shows last 12 to 15 hours on my feet the whole time. And I do working 7 days a week. I do, 345, 350 shows a year. So I said, I don't have your chops as a musician, but to call me a rock star, no. Any more than I would call you a mixologist. So,
Well, since you brought up music again, and it's obvious that you're a music fan.
yeah.
You've already mentioned Tom Waits, Reckless Kelly, a few people here, Tom Petty, and you're known for having a great knowledge of music. I've rarely stumped you. What would you say are some of your other favorite all-time bands or singers, songwriters, things like that?
Well, obviously, Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. I was a huge Clash fan coming up. I didn't appreciate the Sex Pistols in the late 70s because I was listening to Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones and Bruce Springsteen. But they were a great one-hit wonder. The quintessential punk band. They self-destructed, but their music was powerful and completely organic. And I'm one of those. Again, not snobs, but I do believe there's only two types of music: good music and bad music. I mean, George Jones, some of the old Johnny Cash, and then the collaborations between Tom Petty and Johnny Cash, or Bob Dylan and Los Lobos or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
What about an all-time greatest bartender song?
Oh, it's interesting. There was a guy who played Sunday nights at El Farol named Chris Abeta. He was a local singer-songwriter. He did a mix of originals and covers. He was just him and a guitar, and he was a great storyteller, almost a Buddha-like figure. He would just sit in this thing and spin these yarns. And on my last night that we worked together, he did Bartender's Blues, which was performed, most people know, from George Jones, but actually it was written by James Taylor, which I didn't know. One bourbon, one scotch, one beer. John Lee Hooker. That one's pretty good. And of course, Closing Time, Tom Waits. Pretty much anything by Tom Waits could fit into the bartender genre. Bad Liver and a Broken Heart.
Now, I first met you at a place called There in Brookhaven, Atlanta, a place where you can get a great meal.
Yes.
What is the best thing on the menu for someone who happens to wander in?
Well, I always tell the story that everything on the menu is good, and I'm not just saying that. I mean, it's the Reuben. No one has ever left disappointed with the Reuben. And I'll tell people come in, I love a Reuben. You can't, and I say, have the Reuben. But I am an Italian boy from New Jersey, and the first thing I had on the menu was the eggplant parmesan, and it is Grandma Figliola grade. I mean, the marinara is fantastic. It's cooked just right. It's not overly cheesy and gooey, but really everything. The burgers are award-winning. Right now we have oysters in, and they're fantastic. Cut above. Yeah, it's just and as I like to tell people, my drinks are pretty good too, and that's actually one of the true privileges of working there, is that the food is set at such a high bar that whether I'm creating something on the fly for a guest or just executing a martini or a Manhattan, and I'm kind of famous for my Mai Tai, that you got to bring your A game, and that brings them back.
How important is humor?
Very important. The devil's in the details, though, because in this age of diversity and cancel culture, not everybody's got the same sense of humor. We're talking about Norm McDonald. I think his brilliance and his authenticity was that there was nothing that was off limits to him, and he could do it in a manner. I'm a huge fan of George Carlin, and it was the same way. It was George at times appear to be a little bit mean-spirited. But Norm McDonald was just that deadpan delivery where he could. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. But yeah, humor is very important. I used to work with a server who had a reputation of being slow, and if you know anything about tequila, it comes in 4 classifications. Silver or Blanco, which is right out of the still. Reposado means it's rested in a barrel for 3 months to a year. And Añejo means it's aged for over a year, 1 to 4 years. And we used to say that she'd ring in a ticket for a silver tequila. By the time she delivered it, it was an Añejo.
What would you say is the best way to disarm an angry or disgruntled customer? Not that you have a lot of them, but
Well, no, and it's funny because it happened the other night. There's a difference between being disgruntled and angry. Someone who's disappointed with service or disappointed with the meal or with my drink, that's very easy. You comp the drink and you apologize and say, I hope you'll give us another shot. People who are angry, they're angry when they walk into the bar.
right.
They're angry when they're at home. They're angry when they're driving to work. And so it's kind of hard to disarm them, so you just have to remove them from the equation. I had 2 guys come in on Saturday night, and they had obviously been watching football all day and drinking. They ordered 2 whiskeys, and they were getting, like, I probably was on the fence whether I was going to serve them or not, but I gave them the benefit of the doubt because the one guy I kind of knew, he had been in a couple times. They immediately got into it with a guest sitting next to them. I just walked over, took the 2 drinks off the bar. I said, let's try this again next week. And to their credit, they didn't cause a ruckus or, it's been many years since I've had to actually physically remove someone from a bar. And most of the places I've worked as in my 40s and 50s, we had someone who would do that, and it would not be my responsibility to remove them from the bar. But yeah, as I said, the whole, do you know who I am? Or,
Oh boy.
yeah. No?
So here's a kind of lightning round. Just say the first thing that pops into your head.
Okay.
Favorite television show of all time?
Mad Men, Sopranos, Breaking Bad.
I'll allow it. Favorite movie of all time?
Oh. I can tell you it's not Cocktail with... The Godfather's great. There's so many of them. One of the things that I get, if you work with me long enough, I will, if I'm trying to make a point or illustrate something, I'll say, have you ever seen the movie?
Yeah. You do that a lot.
Yeah, Platoon. There's the way things are. They're the way things ought to be and the way they are, So, anyway.
A favorite compliment?
A couple months ago, a couple came in and they were both industry people. And they were genuine, and I did the show. They had a burger and they loved the burger, the food. I started taking them on a tour of different spirits and different drinks and telling the little history and the backstory to some of them. And the gentleman left a wonderful tip. And he said, this is the best experience I've ever had in a restaurant.
Wow.
And I said, that's awesome.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's what makes the job. When you spend 16 hours a day on your feet, and my feet and my legs are constantly in pain. But when that happens, or when the other night I have a young lady, she comes in for the Ramos Fizz, which is a classic old drink, and there's a whole great story to it. And she comes in now twice a week for Ramos Fizz. And when you do that, when you serve that Ramos Fizz, your legs don't hurt, your feet don't hurt. When somebody, that's why I do it. That's why I do it.
My last question. If you could give advice to a young Chris Renaldo, if you could go back somehow, what would you say to him?
I would, with 3 ex-wives, I'd be that.
Back to humor.
Don't do it. No. That's for the purposes of this. I wish I would have gotten to this earlier. But the way I look at it, it's just I consider myself to be kind of a part-time or dysfunctional Buddhist. So this is where I am right now, and this is where the universe put me. But as I said, I had other stuff to do. I was an aspiring football player, and so when that fizzled out, you know, um, I guess there's I don't I don't I don't want to say I'm not comfortable, but I don't have a lot of regrets. Like I don't know that I would. I was always good at telling the people I loved them, and trying to be the best me. There's obviously a lot of tactical mistakes we make on the way. Some related to humor.
Yeah.
Oops, that didn't play well. But yeah, for the most part, I don't know that I would change much. You know, except for the obvious ones, which you can't change. So
Well, Chris Renaldo, thanks for eating with me. Thanks for talking to me.
thanks for having me.
Until next time.
Cheers.